get like a backup point guard role in the league. I think he can do some nice things. So I thought that was a decent value in a draft that towards the end of the first round, it's just I felt like there were a lot of guys there that it's, we'll get into some of them, but, you're kind of like, is this guy really going to be an NBA player? I felt like as the draft went on towards the end of the first round, you're thinking, is this guy really going to be in the NBA in 5 years? So it's hard to tell, but the other team that I really felt like was a big loser, Jason, was the Washington Wizards. Watching the draft, my impression was we get past 6, and I say, as a Bulls fan, there's White and there's Reddish. As long as they get one of those two guys, we're good. And then when they take White, I think, wow, the Pelicans have absolutely lucked out. They're going to get Cameron Reddish, who at the start of this year would have been the second or third pick in the draft. And now they get him at 8 and get another pick for their trouble. And that's the guy they might have thought about taking at 4. Unbelievable. Great move. They pass on him. Then, number 9 comes up, Jason. The Washington Wizards, who have nothing much on the roster, really hard to tell where they're going, really need someone who has the potential to be a star player. They need to take a big swing. And who do they pick, Jason?
Are you leaving the suspense for the listeners? Because I want you to take this one. I mean, I like this kid, but I'll let you answer.
I like him. I like him too. I like Hachimura. I think it was great. He had a great interview. He's not a potential all-star. Like, his ceiling just isn't there. This isn't a guy who has that kind of ceiling, and it just was a completely baffling move for a different reason than these other teams. It's just, if you're the Wizards, you need to take a swing there. And they took a guy who just doesn't really have the skill set to be a star player in the league. And I found that pick just so baffling when you have a guy like a Cameron Reddish there who, there's a possibility he just goes into the league and he's Jeff Green, or he's just a backup guy who's never that great. But he has a ceiling. And if you're the Wizards, you have to take someone with a higher ceiling. The Hachimura pick, the thing that really bothered me is that for the Wizards, what is it? If he hits his potential and he's the guy he could be, I mean, he's probably your sixth guy, your seventh guy. I'm not sure that he has a very high ceiling. I think he has a lower floor. He's a good defensive player, not a great shooter, but he has a lot of skills. He has some potential. He could be a good defender in the league. He has a nice wingspan. I mean, athletic guy. I mean, there's a lot to like about him, but it's just he doesn't seem like a guy who's going to really be a star. And for the Wizards, I feel like they had to take a swing, Jason. And for them to kind of take a guy who was much lower on most draft boards, I'm generally not a big fan of it. But for a team like the Wizards, I just couldn't really understand what they were trying to accomplish with that pick, Jason. I don't know if maybe I'm crazy.
Look, I think Hachimura could end up being a good player. He's the first ever draft pick from Japan. I thought that's a great story. If Bradley Beal stays, I think that they'll form a nice 1-2 punch. But the Wizards are so far off, it's not even funny. Maybe tonight's a step one, or this draft is step one, and the Wizards kind of rebuilding a team again. But they're capped out with John Wall, so they have to build through the draft. But some of the decisions that front office has made they're not smart. And I don't know where to put this team on the NBA hierarchy. They're just not very good.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just I found that move really questionable. I mean, it's one thing if this is a kid who's kind of a raw player, but who's really young. But I mean, he's a 21-year-old player, so for draft terminology, he's really sort of further along than some of these other guys. So I don't know. I found that a little bit questionable. I thought they could have gotten a guy with a little bit more potential than him. I mean, it's possible he develops, and I eat my words, but I think that was not maybe the ideal. But with that, Jason, we will talk about a few other teams, but I really do want to get your thoughts as we move down towards the bottom of the first round to the Nets, who had a really interesting draft here. They made some moves. They came into the night with some picks. They ended up making some trades. What did you think of the night overall for Brooklyn, and what were your takeaways?
Well, when they traded the 27th pick to the Clippers just to free up additional cap space, it's obvious. Sean Marks is swinging for the fences, trying to get 2 max free agents this weekend when free agency opens up. But I thought they did get a couple of upside picks. Nick Claxton, who was as high as like 15th or 16th, or really the right after the lottery on some draft boards, ends up being the second to last player in the green room, gets to stay in Brooklyn. He just reminds me a little bit of Jared Allen, except Claxton can handle the ball. He's got a little bit more of a polished 3-point shot. I think both of these Nets picks are going to spend some time on Long Island in the G League, but Claxton's got a chance to be a really good reserve big man if he can fill out his frame. He needs to gain weight. He said he's not afraid to go up against a guy like Joel Embiid, but neither was Jared Allen, and Embiid abused Allen. So I think Claxton does need to put on some weight, add some strength. And then you got a guy, Jalen Hands, who was taken with the 56th pick. And he was a really high recruit coming out of high school. And at UCLA, a lot of experts kind of named him Baby Westbrook. And then he didn't really have that great a career at UCLA. The Nets are taking a chance on these guys, hoping that Kenny Atkinson's developmental staff can bring the most out of them. And once again, Sean Marks goes for 2 high character guys. I loved what I saw out of both guys in their introductory press conferences. I thought Claxton, was wise beyond his years. His freshman year at Georgia, he came off the bench. Then Tom Crean gets there, turns him into a starter, and he's a force. So if he could be another shot blocker for the Nets, I'll be thrilled. I do think he needs to fill out his frame, as I said, just so he can rebound at a high level in the NBA. And then Hands could be a nice reserve guard, depending what the Nets do in free agency. But I think both guys will spend some time in the G League, and they both have some upside. So those are my thoughts on the Nets draft. I thought, once again, they didn't reach. They didn't find someone they loved at 27. They didn't find someone they loved at 17, which is why they traded that pick a couple weeks ago to the Hawks. And they ended up getting guys in the second round. And Claxton on their board was a first-round pick. So, once again, kudos to Sean Marks.
Well, what about, though? I mean, you left out I'm surprised, but you left out the part that I was most impressed by, which was that they get out of this draft that a lot of people kind of felt was maybe a weaker draft. And they end up getting a pick for next year, which, I mean, again, it's always hard to tell this early, but the consensus is next year is going to be better than this year. I mean, this year had really one star guy and then a lot of guys who people are hoping. Some people feel like it was a 2-player draft, a 3-player draft, but not many people feel like after those first few picks that there were many guys who are potential all-stars, whereas in 2020, there's a belief that it's a stronger draft. So I really liked that the Nets kind of traded, especially given that it was a later pick to begin with. Like, I mean, at that point, what's the variance? What's the chance of it being a much worse pick? I think it's pretty low. So I loved that. Thought that was a great move. But
well, you know who the pick belongs to, right?
It's a Sixers pick.
Right. So I did see a lot of tweets that said, all right, we need the Sixers to suck next year, but make the playoffs because it is lottery protected. And the Nets also have like 3 seconds. So, in 2020, in a much better draft, as you said, Ben, Marks could kind of, group a couple of those picks together and move up if need be. So he did give himself draft flexibility next year. You're right. I forgot.
The other thing about it that I love is, I think something that people just forget all the time, and I think it's one of the most underrated things about draft picks, is they're sort of like a new car. The moment you drive them off the lot, they lose like 40% of their value. And it's the same thing with a draft pick. The second you make it, it becomes less valuable. Unless you get a guy like Williamson, teams would rather have the pick and get to make it themselves than have the player. Every team in the world can convince themselves that they're going to get a great player with a pick. Once it becomes an actual player, it becomes less valuable to them. And I think that's another brilliant thing about this trade for the Nets, is that they now acquire a pick that they can put in a trade if they need to, and they don't have to pay salary right away, as opposed to having a player who, if another team doesn't like him, you're now going to get, less value than you would have had you traded the pick before the draft. So another great move by Marks, I thought. Obviously, as you said, going to depend a lot on free agency to get a full kind of grade on there. But let me selfishly move to the Bulls, Jason, because really, this was the high point of most of my season, getting to see the draft, given how bad the Bulls were most of the year. And they made a pick that, generally I think most people were okay with. Kobe White out of North Carolina, a guy who I liked. I remember watching the North Carolina Duke game and a couple of the tournament games, and and thinking that it was funny how Nazir Little had been the higher prospect when it seemed like Kobe White was the best player on the team. And so to see him go to the Bulls is promising. And I guess my biggest takeaway for him was that I like the fit. I mean, I think another example of a team that got a guy who should fit in with the rest of the team. He's great with the ball in his hands, a guy who has the size, I would say. I mean, his wingspan isn't where you might like it to be, but has the size to really defend the shooting guard position if needed. Very quick, so he projects as a guy who could be a good defensive player, pretty athletic, fast guy, so a guy who you can really sort of get some easy buckets in transition with. I think the big question here, Jason, and this is my concern for the Bulls next year, is, unlike the Nets, who have one of the best coaching staffs in the league, with the Bulls coaching staff, how much are they going to unleash him and this team in transition, where that should be the strength of the Bulls next year when you look at the roster. I mean, when you look at a team that has Markkanen, Levine, and now White, I mean, not to mention Otto Porter, this is a team who should be living in transition. And that was not their calling card, shall we say, last year. So very interested to see how much they let him loose in the open court. But overall, love the pick. Thought it was good, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in a Bulls uniform.
I actually do like Chicago's projected starting lineup going into next season with White, Levine, Porter, Markkanen, and Wendell Carter. We were saying on past shows how the Bulls have their front court of the future and they needed a point guard. That's exactly what they got. Mm-hmm. Will he be Derrick Rose? Who knows? Derrick Rose is a once-in-a-generational talent at that position before he got hurt. But I like what the Bulls are doing. They're slowly building. They have their veteran there in Porter, who's making a lot of money. And hopefully by the time his contract is off the books, the Bulls will be ready to contend. I do like Wendell Carter being at the draft.
Yeah.
And, you had a Duke guy kind of popping up on his interview with Maria Taylor and saying, welcome to the family. So you had some Duke and UNC love because now they're forced to like each other. But, no, I thought it was a good move by the Bulls for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Carter will be a key player for the Bulls next year. They have a lot of defensive deficiencies, and they need Carter to be a really good defensive player next year. But moving off that, there were a couple other quick hitters I wanted to go over. And I wanted to get your thoughts. I mean, one of the big things that I thought was interesting was the lack of big men taken. I don't know if you noticed that, but there just weren't that many big men. And one of the few that did get taken was by the Pacers, who end up kind of getting someone who a lot of people felt like was skilled, kind of slipped. And his last name is Batadze. It's Goga Batadze. I hope I'm saying that correctly. But
sounds like a Dragon Ball Z character.
I completely agree. Goku and Vegeta definitely would have fought a guy named Goga Batadze. But for the Pacers, what does this mean for Domantas Sabonis and Miles Turner, who obviously aren't going to be able to really play next to him? I mean, that's too many guys. I think this spells kind of the end for Thaddeus Young officially, but it did make me wonder what this means to the Pacers. I mean, did you have any thoughts on that pick and what this might mean for them going forward?
Where he got taken in the draft doesn't necessarily pencil you in as an NBA starter. We'll see what this kid does in summer league and in training camp. I think Turner is still the starter there. And then Sabonis, who opened some eyes the last couple of years as a throw-in in the Paul George trade, actually ended up giving almost as much value as Oladipo is, even though Oladipo's getting all the accolades, being a perennial all-star now. But I don't think the Pacers are going to have to make that decision right now. I think this kid comes off the bench. And then they have a glut of big men, and if they have to deal one of them for another wing, they did get T.J. Warren from the Suns in a deal that was made the morning of the draft. So they have some options. I know the Pacers are likely going after Ricky Rubio in free agency, and they're another team that are just trying to get role players and young guys and veterans in to surround Oladipo. Now, I'm a little disappointed in Miles Turner because I thought he would have developed into more of an all-star type by now, but it might just not be in the cards for him. But we'll see what happens. I think the Pacers are another one of those middle-of-the-road teams in the East. They could be a top 4 seed. They could be a lottery team. It all depends on how free agency shakes out. But moving ahead to the Pacers, there were a couple of really nice value picks. I thought Nasir Little at 25 to the Portland Trailblazers, he was a borderline lottery pick. I think he fits right in. And you have to love Portland's offseason right off the bat between trading for Kent Bazemore, getting rid of Evan Turner's contract, and then getting Nasir Little. That is much needed depth that they could have used in the West Finals against the Warriors. So two really good moves, and I think Little will contribute right away.
Yeah, I mean the one of the we're gonna